I started looking at all the English-speaking countries that had student visas with an immigration pathway. My love for astrophysics that never kind of turned into reality for me. Going back 9 years ago in 2017, when I used to ask people that exact same question, everybody without a doubt said the Terminator. The research showed the hippocampus, the part of the brain that's responsible for spatial relationships, physically shrinks in drivers that rely on Google Maps. So it's kind of the sensors are like a trained human ear, and they've been trained to listen for signs of respiratory illnesses. We don't need cloud connectivity for our brain to work.
Just go and do it and see what happens.
Ideas are worth like jack shit, absolute jack shit. Like if you can't execute, there's nothing.
Just take that initiative to actually take whatever crazy ideas that they might have and just try to see what comes of it.
Don't be afraid of ambition. Chase it, love it, wrap your arms around it and say it out loud.
New Zealanders don't know any better. They will just get up and give it a shot. That's why we were first to get to the top of Mount Everest.
Go to dream that ultimate dream. Like, what is it that you ultimately want to do? And it's all achievable.
Great. Well, Saba, welcome to TechMates. Great to have you. And I want to start somewhere where I think most people wouldn't start when interviewing you as an AI founder and as an AgTech founder. Is your company is named after a galaxy that is approximately 13 billion light years away from Earth. And it's, not the company name itself. I mean, there's, it's derived from MACSO 647 JD, right? The furthest known galaxy in the Milky Way. And your reasoning, I think, is that you want to genuinely kind of outside the box thinking. So you need a box bigger than the Milky Way. So like, what does the name actually mean to you? Or when you walk into the office every morning?
Yeah. So it's exactly that. The name, and I remember when I workshopped the name in my bedroom with like lots of sticky notes on the wall. And the thought process was having that culture of thinking outside the box. And so this galaxy is the furthest galaxy away from Milky Way galaxy as of 2017, which is when the name was coined. And so going into the office and having this mindset, the conversation with the team when something comes up is always about how do we do it, not if we can do it. And I think that's kind of like the core value that aligns with where the name comes from.
Do you feel like that puts a lot of pressure on the team or on you?
I think at the time of kind of problem solving, yes. But I guess it's a healthy amount of pressure. We are a startup after all. Pressure is what, makes us do what we do. So yeah, I think it does in a healthy way. Hope that answers the question.
It does. It's very unique. I've never, usually a company name kind of tries to signal what the company does. Yours kind of signals that there's no limits to what the company does in some ways, right?
Great. Yeah, I want to take you back to the very beginning of your New Zealand story. So you arrived in New Zealand in 2012. You were 22.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark and I have moved countries many times. We know the feeling. But the first 6 months are always very chaotic, right? Like you're trying to figure out money, you're trying to figure out where to live, friends, social circles, all of that. What was the first year actually like? Give us the real version of what 2012 was like for you.
Ooh, that takes me back like so far back that I feel like it's almost a different life. But yes, I arrived in New Zealand when I was 22 after 6 years of living in India. And I was born in Iran, so I had like two completely different cultures behind me. And then I was in New Zealand, which is again another completely different culture, different language, different accents. I kind of felt like I had to learn English all over again. And yeah, there was quite a bit of pressure because I came to New Zealand with a small amount of money, and then I kind of like promised myself that was it, that I was never going to go back to the parents. I was not going to let this fail. So it was kind of like success is the only way forward.
What brought you to New Zealand?
So when I was in India, we were mainly my mother. She's kind of the hero behind all of my stories. And she basically was like, well, India, you can't stay. It's not a country that you can immigrate to, and you need to go somewhere to build alive. And I started looking at all the English speaking countries that had student visas with an immigration pathway. And to be honest, at the time, I didn't even know like where New Zealand was. I thought it was like this tropical island with, you know, warm sandy beaches. And I think it was about maybe just a few months before I came to New Zealand that I learned how cold it was. And I had to go back to Iran for like a week to just buy warm clothes. So I have to bring them to New Zealand. But yeah, I think it was, I went to a student fair where all the universities come and they present, you know, their courses and everything they offer. And then I came across this concept of a 1-year course, which was a postgraduate diploma, which is level 8 in New Zealand, which is kind of like the first year of your master's. So you get a degree, but it's not master's, it's also not bachelor's. And yeah, so that basically is what brought me to New Zealand. And then I think within 6 months of being here, I got hired by IBM. And then yeah, I stayed, and now New Zealand is home.
How long did it take you to make New Zealand home?
It took a few years, to be honest. When you immigrate and you know, when you immigrate under the circumstances that someone like me did, you know, in India, we could never call it home because it always felt like we were there temporarily because we always were on visas and we had to get extensions. And then I think between 2012 to 2014, 15 was it 14? I can't remember exactly until I got my residency in New Zealand. It still kind of felt like I'm here just temporarily and things may not happen and you don't know the future. And so anything that I purchased was around things that I could carry with me if I had to leave rather than kind of settling in a place. And then once I got my residency, I remember, this is getting a bit personal, but I was in a relationship at the time and then that didn't work. And so I think by the time I kind of moved out and I became like fully independent on my own in my own little studio in Auckland CBD, as tiny as it was mine and it was my space. And I no longer had to worry about leaving or having to leave. And that's when it started kind of feel like home. But really the turning point was in 2018 when my mother joined me in New Zealand, and then 2021 when my brother joined me in New Zealand. And I was like, okay, now family's here. And so now this is really home.
Wow. What did that feel like when you were in that studio and you felt like I have my visa, this is kind of now my home? What was that feeling?
Amazing. It was amazing. I didn't care that it was small. I did not care that it was nothing flash or luxury. I just cared about the fact that it was mine. Mine as in like my space, you know, and that I could feel it, that I could call it mine, that I could call it my house. I didn't buy it. I was renting, but I could call it my house.
Yeah.
I could call it like my stuff, like my vacuum cleaner, my wardrobe.
Interesting.
Literally, it's simple stuff like that. And I think until you're in a position that you can't say those things for a few years, you don't know what it feels like. And then when you start experiencing them again, then I think you kind of appreciate those little things that you have. And then, you know, I'm inviting my friends to my house. And yeah, that it felt amazing.
That's cool. Well, what were you doing in India? Also, I'm very curious.
We left when I was 16, my brother was 9, and there were a couple of things. So the main thing we were doing there, we were students, and there were 2 reasons why we left. Going back to my mother's story, she was an electrical engineer in Iran for about 23 years, but she absolutely hated her job. She was excellent at it, but she absolutely hated it. And she's a poet, she's a writer, she's a life coach now, and she really wanted to go and pursue what she loved. And so that's one of the reasons why we went to India, because she started studying at 48. She went back to university, you know, from day one of a bachelor's degree. She did her English literature course, and then, you know, started like researching about Indian history and Indian philosophy, and then got her master's and yada, yada, yada. But the best part of that story is her and I graduated on the same day. And she graduated from her second degree and me from my first from my computer science.
That's
So
cool.
that was one of the reasons, but the other reason was also kind of sadly leaving Iran. It was no longer a place for us to call home.
Yeah. So you've had a very interesting and unique story of getting to New Zealand. So if you now built 2 companies here and won the APAC Innovator of the Year award, when you picture that 22-year-old who just landed, what does she think of where you are now?
I think given my expectations of myself are so high, she would probably be like, why aren't you any further? Sometimes. And then my now version would probably just look back at her and say, love your enthusiasm, but life is harder than you think. But I guess the other version of me would be proud. I guess a much younger version of me would be proud. I think, and I say this to some of my closest kind of family members sometimes. I'm like, it's a good feeling to sometimes look at myself in the mirror and see the image of me that I pictured as a kid. That's a great feeling. But yeah, I think my 22-year-old self had much higher expectations of where I would be by 36. Probably because I thought 36 was, much further than it actually was.
Yeah, I think we can all relate.
Yeah.
I want to understand a little more how you became interested in AI, because that's quite an interesting origin story in itself. So from what we understand, you became interested in Stephen Hawking, specifically around his warnings about AI danger. And then that led you to write your master thesis about AI ethics, around the why behind the danger of AI. And then that led you to choose this company name, right? So yeah, just love to understand a little bit more the kind of evolution of your personal AI journey.
Yeah. So it goes back to when I was, I think, 10, when I decided to be an astrophysicist. But truth be told, I didn't know what astrophysics was. I just said, I want to be an astronaut, but not the ones that go to space, the ones that are on Earth. And then I went through, high school, and I remember I had a really bad mathematics teacher, and that dream kind of shattered. But then years after, when I went to later stages in my final high school years and found a really good mathematics teacher, and I became I actually started teaching maths and then did computer science and all that kind of stuff. So life kind of took a different path for me when it came to choosing astrophysics versus then landing in computer science, which I absolutely loved. But it was around that age, 21, 22, when I came across Stephen Hawking's book called The Grand Design. Highly recommend everybody to read it. And then yeah, so then that kind of led into, other kind of books that I was reading, and then, the warnings about AI and Stephen Hawking's and Elon Musk's and all that kind of stuff. And then, that led to my master thesis. But the name MACSO was particularly chosen because of my love for astrophysics that never kind of turned into reality for me. And so it's kind of like carrying that part of me that always wanted to be that astrophysics that never got to be. And then, yeah, that's kind of like where we have landed now. So one of the questions I get asked sometimes about MACSO is like, oh, you're based in New Zealand, you've gone international, too soon, or you kind of like are on all these countries. And I kind of look at them and be like, yeah, but the Earth is a small planet.
And New Zealand is a very small place.
Yeah, what are you talking about? Like my dream is to have my sensory AI on Mars, discovering galaxies. But yeah, that's kind of like the full story.
Very cool. And what drew you to astrophysics in the first place? Where does this fascination come from?
It came from the first book my mother ever bought me after I learned how to read. And that was a book about, our solar system and the planets. And then I learned that the sun was about to die, in a few billion years. And I remember going to school in tears and being like, the sun's going to die at some point and it's going to fry everybody on Earth. And so we have to get everybody out of Earth. And that was a 8-year-old me. And everybody laughed at me at school. And I was like, you can laugh, but this is real. And so I think they were kind of like, why are you so upset about something that's a few billion years away? And my mindset was, no, but we have to keep doing things for the future generations. Like very unconsciously, I've always had this thought of we need to build certain things in this life that is so fundamental to help the next generation. And yeah, that story just kind of like kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger until,
Mm.
it turned into love for astrophysics. And then I've always been very curious about life. Where do we come from? Why do we exist? How does the universe work? Like my recent flight to France got rerouted to Geneva, and that would usually be a big inconvenience. But I was like, I'm in Geneva. I'm gonna go see the CERN Science Center. Like, bring it on. Thank you for canceling my flight and sending me to Geneva. So yeah, it's kind of like always that curiosity about life and the universe is what led me to astrophysics.
Oh, wow, that's super interesting. We see a lot of founders, they're like driven by something much bigger than themselves. And I'm curious where, like, different people, it comes from different places, but where does that drive for you to want to create something that is bigger than yourself? Where does that come from for you?
I guess it kind of comes from this personality trait that I have, which is I have a highly allergic reaction to an unfair situation. Right. So when something is really unfair, and obviously having been born in Iran from a very young age, I realized how unfair the world around me was. And I guess it was always that feeling of, I need to somehow fix this, and obviously as a kid, I thought I could fix it. And now as an adult, I'm saying I can contribute to fixing it. But I think that's the main reason. Like when you grow up going around and like seeing, buildings that have been ruined, and your parents tell you like, this is because of the war, or you grow up with these like war stories. Because I was born 2 years after the Iran and Iraq war. And I was born in the same state that was a neighboring state with Iraq. And, some of my father's, most of his cousins had passed away in that war. And so when you grow up hearing all of these stories, you kind of sit as a kid and think, what are adults thinking? Like, why? Like, there's a lot of whys. When you go through that phase as a child of why, except for when you grow up in an environment like that, you don't ask, I don't know, why is the sky blue? You kind of ask, why do we have war? Why do people die this way? Why are there so many funerals? And so I think the concept of the whys that you ask completely changes. Like, why do I have to wear a headscarf? Why do I have to be Muslim? Why am I being force-fed a whole bunch of like information that make no sense to me? Why are my parents different outside of the house than they are inside? Why can't I be myself? All those kind of like questions again, and that also combined with just me being born that way of, not wanting to settle for what didn't make sense.
And I mean, given the situation that we're seeing now in Iran, how do you think about it now? Given that, I guess, yeah, you sort of grew up in that country for a formidable part of your life. Do you feel like it's just all hopeless, or do you have some hope that it can eventually be, a country like others based on democratic principles where you kind of, the next sort of Saba, when she's 5, doesn't ask all those questions and asks, but why is the sky blue?
Look, I think the way I think about Iran right now is more driven by hope than it is by logic. So I hope that happens, and I hope that this regime goes, and I hope the world kind of sees them for what they really are. And I hope that they finally see the truth that we have been experiencing for 47 years, or me for my entire life. Will it happen? I don't really know. I feel like when it comes to geopolitics or politics in general, I've lost so much hope in the people in charge that it's kind of like very difficult for me to kind of be sure about an outcome. What I have learned though in my life is that whatever is unfair and evil would eventually die. There's only so much that it can go further. The sad part of this entire thing was that until this evil actually dies, it's going to kill a lot of innocent people. Sorry, that's a bit graphic, but it's also true, and it's the reality of what's been going on there. So I hope it changes. Who knows? I always like when I talk to my friends, we start kind of like this hopeful dreaming, almost like hopeful, like dreaming of next year this time, we can go to Iran for our Persian New Year, and and we get to see those monuments, or we get to see our loved ones again, and they get to be happy and not afraid anymore. So, and I feel like if we didn't do that, then the kind of mental and psychological impact of whatever is going on there on Iranians in diaspora, and the ones inside Iran, is going to be catastrophic. So I guess we'll just hang on to this hope and see what happens.
Yeah. And I guess, we all share that hope. It seems to me that you've always been very interested from very early on about the future of humanity in a very grand scale, but also on a smaller scale, how we live together right now and what's fair, what's not fair, what's ethic. You spend a lot of time thinking about AI ethics. And we found in our research that you did a competition where you had to compress your AI ethics research into like a 3-minute pitch that non-academics would understand. I don't know how much you remember of that 3-minute pitch, but what was that about? And how do you think about AI ethics in general? Yeah, if you still remember it.
Pitch.
Yeah, I know which one you mean. It was a 3-minute competition, like a 3-minute thesis competition that at AUT. I can't remember the exact contents of that pitch because I've given so many since, but I still kind of remember the kind of core part of what my thesis was about, which is, why is AI perceived to be a dangerous technology? So one is, lack of knowledge of people who are investing in AI, and the second is lack of kind of I don't know what the right word is. This future kind of more holistic, kind of bigger picture, or the ability to see that bigger picture by some of the engineers that are building AI, and then the rest is kind of a lot of that, a lot of the advancements is driven by profitability, and a lot of times governance and ethics slows down that profitability. So these are like some of the core elements. And then on the other side, it was also like, as AI advances and we kind of hand over more mental tasks to it, we're going to kind of end up in this imbalance of intelligence with like natural stupidity and artificial intelligence. So yeah, but that was the core of my thesis, and that 3-minute pitch was that was, I can't remember how many times I practiced that, but it was hours and hours.
How do you feel about where we are going with AI now? Obviously, this has been a few years ago. Things have accelerated quite a bit. I think the brand AI has really, really decreased in popularity in the last 6 or 12 months. Are we on the right track, or what's your feeling around AI ethics at the moment?
So one very interesting shift that I'm seeing in people and their mindset when it comes to AI, and I do this as an icebreaker in a lot of my kind of presentations and training, is I start the session by asking people, when I say the phrase artificial intelligence, what's the first thing that pops into your mind? And right now people say ChatGPT or Claude or LLMs, and privacy issues sometimes comes up, terms and conditions, And then I tell them, we're in 2026 now, going back 9 years ago in 2017, when I used to ask people that exact same question, everybody without a doubt said the Terminator. And so it's a very interesting worldwide, yet very quick shift in people's mindset about how they think about AI. That it has changed from something people are scared of to then something that they found quite convenient, to now something that, yes, they're being bored of. Where I think that narrative would fail, and I think where we have consistently failed as humans when it comes to introducing new tools and technologies into the market, is we often do that without preparing the population for what's coming. We throw something out there and we let it go wrong, and then we reactively go and say, now let's put the safeguards because these are the places that we see it's gone wrong. And I feel like we're repeating that same mistake with AI. It's not about how quickly it's advancing. We've always known that this is how quickly it will advance, and I think we're going to see even more acceleration. My biggest worry is the lack of those safeguards, and the fact that the people that are developing these types of technologies, or the tech companies that are driven by profitability and money, But historically, the people that have put these safeguards in place are the governments that are often much slower, compared to the pace of technology. So that to me is the biggest risk that we're dealing with. But on the other hand, the mistake that I think the tech industry is making, and the entire kind of core concept behind MACSO is to go against that narrative, is that there's been so much investment in AI that is so human specific. So, our productivity, our financial data, marketing, that sort of things. You have an AI that can read your emails and write your emails and, whip up a presentation for you in minutes. But where we lack AI is now the rest of the world. So we have this amazing environment that we're living in, and this amazing environment goes unmonitored yet impacted by our actions. And there's so many risks out there that, if detected early, can prevent major catastrophes. And the core idea behind the MACSO platform itself comes from the fact that if you look at AI, and AI always basically replicates different intelligent behavior, right? So we have our frontal lobe where our logic and our reasoning and our language processing is, and that's where the core of the current commercialized AI has been focused on. And what I said with MACSO is, well, what about the rest of the brain? What about our sensory system that has helped us survive all these years? What if you could have sensors out there that could see danger, that could hear danger, that could smell danger, that could feel danger, and then prevent bushfires, prevent deaths caused by, bad air quality. And so that was like the core idea behind, and then, the use case that we're currently focused on is, the disease detection in animals, which on its own is a huge kind of market with a lot of gaps that we're trying to address. And this concept kind of was formed around between kind of 2019 to 2021, and in 2021 is when MACSO was kind of founded. And now 6 years after, I'm starting to see people say, what about physical AI? What about sensory AI? And I'm kind of like, hallelujah, finally. Like when we first started, we would talk about, MACSO, and it would go like, people would be like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. But now it's kind of like, so I think the next wave in kind of like what would take off after the large language models is this physical AI wave. But anyway, going back to the ethics, is we're putting too much focus on humans and releasing stuff without being ready, and not investing enough in the other side of where AI could actually really help. And that, the policies and governance around it is way too slow and way too reactive.
Saba, whenever you were researching this, like, what was your, I guess, degree of confidence that we would actually get, whatever you want to call it, Terminator or whatever, that level of AI? Whenever you saw ChatGPT then of 2022 come out, did you sort of say, oh, this is it? Or kind of what was, tell us about what you experienced when you first started using some LLMs, given your extensive research into it.
When I started using LLMs?
Like, I guess first, did you believe, because like, look, it's sort of still unclear. I think a lot of people debate this, like whether, AI will sort of get to AGI, will plateau, like where's it going to go, et cetera. There's a lot of different opinions about this. I guess back in 2017, 2018, when you were studying this, right, at the time it was super, super early. Now we can sort of reason about it, and you have some data points over a couple of years of how like LLMs are scaling and how they perform different benchmarks. Whereas before you didn't have any of that, right? So what was your personal perspective on like the degree of confidence and where we would land?
Interestingly enough, as time goes by, I say this not having kind of gone back to that thesis for a few years, but still having that same mindset. As time goes by, I gain more confidence in what I saw back then. So back then I wasn't as confident as I am now, is what I'm saying. The kind of core of my thesis was to take AI and then compare it with two other industries where, things were put out there without safeguards, and then they went wrong, and then people put safeguards in place. So first one was the healthcare industry, with like medication and everything that, the way things used to be tested before versus now. And then the second one was the nuclear energy industry. And I think based on the patterns that I saw in both, then I kind of like came up with this thesis of AI. And what I pointed out in my thesis was that the danger is actually a lot bigger than the Terminator. And the reason why I say that is because, you know, people, if you watch the movie The Terminator, people in the movie still had the smarts and the physical capability to come up with ideas to fight this entity. Right. And my biggest worry is that the next generation, if they rely this heavily on AI and outsource all of their mental capability to AI, that it's a real worry. I'm not saying they're bad. I think they also have the opportunity that if used correctly and if taught well to the new generation, they can actually make them smarter. But I don't see those. I don't see those safeguards, and I don't see those trainings. Which is what makes me super worried. That's the biggest kind of worry that I have. But the other side is also the people.
So basically AI is going to pacify us through cat videos and Instagram slop, and we're all going to become brain dead and hand over all our data to the big companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of that, but it's also a bit of, you know, it's kind of like what the Industrial Revolution did to our bodies, AI can do to our brain. So before the Industrial Revolution, you know, when we had people that had to use their physical, you know, muscles to like carry stuff, you know, whether it was like drawing water from the well and like walking kilometers but if you look at, you know, us now, there's like higher rates of obesity and there's higher rates of like heart disease and, you know, stuff that didn't exist before. Part of that is exercise. The other part is like processed food. And then when it comes to AI, it's handing over those mental tasks. Like there was one research done in the UK on the brains of drivers, and they realized, and this goes back a while ago, so I need to find where this research was, but from memory, the research showed the hippocampus, the part of the brain that's responsible for spatial relationships, physically shrinks in drivers that rely on Google Maps too much. And that makes sense because if you look at us now, like ask yourself, how many times have you been from point A to point B using Google Maps, right? Now, Google Maps is amazing because it can save you time. But for me personally, now that I know this, once I go somewhere, 1, maybe 2, maximum 3 times, I try and teach my brain so I don't lose that cognitive map that I'm born with, because how did we find our way before Google Maps? So it's that same thing that I'm now starting to see in like the new generation, shorter attention spans, you know, less kind of willingness for learning something in depth, like wanting everything like bullet point, using kind of clickbait or like very short Instagram videos as facts without thinking, without logic, without reasoning. And that's, I think, is one of the things that makes me really worried about use of AI. And I think with the right education, we can change that.
I'm afraid that people are going to just go for the easy path and that we're all going to be doomed.
Then there's that. So take care of your children.
Yeah.
Take care of your children. Yeah.
You already teased a little bit about what you're building with MACSO, and we want to get there. But just to go one step before, so you had a kind of like a corporate career for a number of years, and you were quite successful in that too. I think you mentioned you went to IBM, you were at Westpac for a while, and then Microsoft. What was your internal conversation with yourself around, you know, in Microsoft, you could have obviously had a great career, and you could have done a lot on AI as well. How and why did you transition out of that corporate career and went into becoming an entrepreneur?
Yeah. One of the things that made me personally, and I'm not saying this applies for everybody, that made me frustrated, or still does in my life, is the moment I feel too comfortable, I start getting uncomfortable. And I think for me, when it came to corporate career, I became comfortable in a role too fast, almost faster than I was expected to have a good CV. You know, they always say like, if you jump ship, you know, less than 2 years or so in a role, you better have a good reason or something like that. And the only role that really challenged me for a good while, which I think that was also about 2.5 years, was the transformation directorship that I had at Westpac. And I was working with McKinsey, and that really opened up my eyes to this new world of business and how you think about running a business. Like before that, I was just computer scientist and thinking about like tech. And I don't come from a family of entrepreneurs. Like entrepreneurship was never a path, like a career path that I was exposed to until I met someone who said he was an entrepreneur. And I remember, because English is not my first language, the first time I came across the word, it was so hard to pronounce. I had to go to Google and I had to listen to it like a gazillion times. I still don't think I can spell it correctly without making a mistake a couple of times. But then after that, I joined Westpac Ventures for a short time. And then we started kind of like working with like a really cool team. I think it was the team that was really good. And then from there, I went to Checkpoint, which was cybersecurity, and then Microsoft. But it was the same pattern over and over again. So I started every role with excitement. And as soon as I was useful for the company, like I had been trained and learned, I started getting bored because I was like, now I'm doing the work. It's a routine. Now I need more. And one thing that happened that changed my career path completely was actually COVID. So before that, I had the absolute pleasure of meeting a fantastic woman named Anna Ariola, who was at Apple and then went to Theranos, and then she was at Microsoft heading the AI teams. She came to New Zealand. We had a conversation. Microsoft was going to set up an AIethics team, and I went for interviews. I had to do them remotely. I was on an Iranian passport, couldn't get a visa to go to the United States for the interview. And then COVID hit, and then they stopped all the cross-country like hiring. And then at that point, I was like, this is it. Like, I'm done. Like, I've had this idea of MACSO for a while. I started Comfort AI back in February 2022 with the intention of kind of bringing more education around AI to the market. And then I was like, no, I can't have a corporate job and try and test the waters and see how this goes. And so in 2021, when Bridgewist and I had a conversation, I was like, I know the next 6 months, that's good enough. Let's jump in it with both feet and see how it goes. And it's been great because you never get bored.
Yeah. And I know Mark is dying to speak about MACSO. So Mark,
wait, so you said
you
you had the idea for a while. Where did the idea come from?
It was kind of the core platform I did. That multi-sensory idea came from, kind of looking at that gap analysis when I was doing my thesis about like all these other parts of the brain that can potentially kind of do a lot of stuff. What I really struggled with, because again, I was kind of new to this whole like venture startup world. What I really struggled with is how do I start? Like, what do I start with? And I am a computer scientist, but I had put most of my focus on ethics and kind of learning the other side, the business side and growing a business. And I didn't have like, PhD in mathematics to sit and, write some of these AI models. And I didn't have the hardware knowledge. So, and I didn't know the idea that I had was actually a deep tech idea, which is, super R&D heavy. And so when the key role I would say that Bridgewist played was to give that kind of first spark of this is where you can start and this is how you can start, the funding from Callahan and then Bridgewist and so on and so forth. But yeah, the idea was there. It was kind of like, wait, like, where do I go? But I talked to like as many people as I could about it. Like I wouldn't shut up.
So what was the idea? What was the idea? What was the essence of the idea?
Well, it was so the idea at the time was this one company that does, the education side and the consultancy side, but also does this multi-sensory platform. So that we have this other part of the brain that's replicated using artificial intelligence that can see and that can hear, and that it kind of uses this environmental data almost rather than the texts and the financial data and all that kind of stuff. But again, yeah, it was quite vague. It was more like how do I replicate the other part of the brain rather than how do I create a solution that can go out there and.
But why? Well, like, where did this like? Was it just like a theoretical concept that you had, or did you already have immediately like practical applications that you were thinking this would apply to?
No, at the time, and we are talking about 2000, the period between 2000, when did I graduate? 19 to 21. It was more of a vague concept of like knowing there was a use, but not knowing where to apply it to. I think I looked at it more from a scientific point of view of what happens. Like, the LLM started as like a scientific idea. What happens if I replicate the way the human brain learns? So it was that. It's what happens if we replicate this other side of the brain? Like, what other gaps can we cover with this other side of the brain? But then, yeah, within 2 years when I kind of met West and kind of got pushed into thinking that these scientific ideas, because I'm curious about everything, right?
Sure.
And how do you then put that curiosity into good use, and then also become curious about how do you commercialize it, and how do you keep it like sustainable so you can actually grow it? That kind of came after that engagement and lessons learned over the last 5 years.
Yeah, and I want to kind of understand, like, how did you, I guess, think about that gap, like the gap between like what most people think, okay, like there's, yeah, like I guess bits, right? Like you're processing bits, or with LLMs are processing like words, tokens. You're sort of, your idea was, well, there's what, just like vision models, and like, I guess other types of models that you could have for other use cases. How did you, I mean, fundamentally, yeah, you're still sort of, there's still, I think the architecture is still in a lot of ways similar across what you're processing, right? What was it kind of more around application, or were you like more just enamored with the idea of like, there is this, human body analogy of like the logical side versus like the rest of it?
It was a bit of both. It was me seeing, and then this is obviously before ChatGPTs of the world became this popular. They existed back then. It was more seeing all these focus of where money was going, where money and AI was going. At the time, about 33%, so a third of it was going into human health and healthcare applications. And then there was a lot of focus on human productivity. Anything that increased your productivity, or anything that increased your revenue through marketing. And the thought process behind that was, well, surely this isn't all we can do with AI. And then kind of like really questioning, and this is one of the reasons why there's so much debate about AI, is that the core concept that we are replicating, called intelligence, does not have a universally agreed upon definition, right? And so when I looked at it, and I was like, well, intelligence is more than just logic. Intelligence is more than just this decision making. So what else does it relate to? What else can we do with it? And so I kind of ran with these, like, the whats and the whys for about a couple of years. And then as that idea started kind of getting a little bit more concrete about the sensory platform, but how do we now apply that sensory platform? This is like 2 years after my master's, so you won't see any evidence of this in my thesis. And where do we apply it, and how does that work? And then came the spark of the idea of, hey, what if we could listen to animals and see if they're sick? And I think yeah.
Isn't that just like different inputs? Isn't it like all kind of like a function of like some kind of like, I don't know, Turing machine, like state machine, that's Turing complete. That just has like the inputs and the outputs are different. You can sort of imagine like an ant is like, yeah, certain inputs, certain outputs, and there's like some kind of basic intelligence that runs the ant's sort of objective function, right? And like you just have different levels of abstraction on which you're running like the objective function, versus like completely different types of intelligences.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're right. Like if you look at maybe the architectures of the neural network, yes, we work with very tiny models compared to really large models. And so that's kind of like the main difference between what the world's focused on now and where our focus is. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's mostly as my tech team disagree with me, but it's mostly the inputs that are different. So it was about, I think in the core of it comes with what kind of data are we feeding our AI, and like why are we feeding so much human related data? Why not feed it everything else in the environment? Why not feed it sounds, and why not feed it I mean, there is vision, there's a lot of vision, but again, it's all applied to human related, our own world, our day-to-day world, cameras and civil defense and safety and theft and all that kind of stuff. What about bushfires? What about deep sea or, space exploration? What about the rest of the environment? It was more kind of those abstract questions, I would say, the 2 years following, than the science of, are the neural networks different?
You have some pretty big news that we wanted also to take an opportunity to announce together with you. So yeah, why don't we hand over to you? What's new in the company?
Quite a few things. So on April 14th this year, we celebrated our 5th year, and it's a very kind of pivotal point in terms of the commercial traction that we've gotten. So we've spent years and years collecting data, training models, running trials, proving to the world that this technology is useful. And now we have some really good data to back it up. But the major news was in December 2025, we signed a multi-year distribution contract with the world's 6th largest animal health pharmaceutical named Virbac, headquartered out of France. And they're going to distribute the solution in Europe, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Japan, and South Korea. And then obviously at the back of all those trials, we then built additional pipeline with Australia. We're talking to distributors out of the US. And the plan is by the end of this year to have presence on all major pork producing countries, with the exception of China, which is, huge milestone for us. And it kind of was like a bit slow, and then it caught on like really fast. Yeah, that's the major news. And then obviously at the back of that, we opened a Series A, so collecting funds to kind of help get us to the next inflection point, which would be, executing these contracts, getting to the next kind of level of revenue, but also now trying to kind of look at how do we extend this from, actually we haven't covered what the solution does yet.
That was going to be my next question.
The current solution
Tell us about the product.
That's being commercialized, which is what Virbac is going to distribute, as AI-enabled audio sensors for respiratory health monitoring in swine and respiratory illnesses, because they are responsible for about 60% of swine death every year globally, and an audio sensor because respiratory illnesses have audio signatures. And the new kind of or the generation 2 version of the device that's going out is it has audio temperature and humidity, and the temperature and humidity would over time turn into us understanding whether environmental factors have any impact on respiratory health of the barn, or vice versa. When pigs get sick, does something in the environment change? But yes, so that's now being commercialized, and that is what Virbac has signed up for to distribute for us in those territories, and then Australia and the United States.
So basically, you're listening to pigs.
Mm-hmm.
You're listening to pigs, and you're detecting whether they're sick or not.
Yes. Yeah. So it's kind of, the sensors are like a trained human ear, and they've been trained to listen for signs of respiratory illnesses. And the very unique thing about our solution compared to the competitor, but also most other solutions that I've seen, is we are using edge AI. So our sensors run 2 AI models on the sensor itself, and they're responsible for kind of like deciding the noise that I'm getting, is it actually a sign of respiratory illness or not? Then they transfer that data to a dashboard, and then on the dashboard we then have a few other models that would then decide, are the pigs healthy? Because I got something, but it could be because of dust, or is something about to go wrong? So the devices have an LED kind of technology. So if they're green, that means everything's good. If something is about to go wrong, so the system is not sure, but I am seeing a rapid increase in signs of respiratory illness, something doesn't feel right, then they go yellow, and they send a text message to the farmer. And then once it confirms that, you're actually dealing with an outbreak because this is consistent over a certain period of time, then they turn red and they send another alert to the farmer. And then every time the pigs get worse, they send another text message to the farmer, which is a sign of either you haven't done anything, so don't keep ignoring, or whatever you're doing is not working. So maybe get the vet back in and change your medication strategy.
And whenever I first heard about this, I was very impressed by how original this idea is. Right? You're listening to pigs. So how did you go from this idea of sensory AI and looking at different modalities to a specific solution of like putting microphones above pigs and listening to them cough, I guess, right? And breathe.
Yeah. So which we call this the AI respiratory health is kind of like the first solution, the proof point. It came from that conversation that I had with Bridgewest in 2021. So they had a Chinese-based semiconductor company, and at a time China was still dealing with African swine fever. The government of China went out to the tech companies and said, is there anything you can do to help us manage this outbreak? Now that sentence over a coffee is what kind of started this entire idea. African swine fever is not a respiratory illness, just a disclaimer for anyone from animal health industry who's listening to this. We know that now, but I guess that kind of like started that research into what are kind of respiratory illnesses, what is, the types of diseases that causes the most amount of issues for the pigs. And the reason for listening is we always say with rule of thumb is AI can do anything a trained human can in 1 second, right? And so the best way to assess how or if AI can do something is to ask an expert, how do you do it? And so for us, those experts were vets, livestock vets. And we asked them, how do you determine if the pigs are sick with any types of respiratory illnesses? And they said, we listen. And simple as that. Then it became AI-enabled audio sensors. And then yeah.
And just so we understand in commercial terms, how big is this problem overall? And like, what do they currently do if there's an outbreak? How do they treat the outbreak? And yeah, why is Virbac basically interested in pushing this out?
Yeah, so the first part of the question about how do they deal with it, they often, because we have all these like massive farms, and I think they did a survey that as of 2025, I think 75% of the workforce is millennials and Gen Z. And now we have a generation that can make more money faster with a ring light and a phone than ever working on a farm, right? So there is this massive shortage of labor on these farms, but also it's not feasible to ask humans to just be in one barn and just continuously listen or watch the pigs. That's not a feasible solution. And so what happens currently is basically they have these stocks people that will go to the barn, maybe once a day. And that may not be a good enough sample size for them to see if the pigs are sick. And so by the time those signs of illness becomes visible, that has turned into an outbreak, because then now you can see it frequently or hear it frequently, and you can hear it everywhere. What happens in that scenario is patient zero. And when we're talking about patient in pig industry, we're talking about a herd, not an individual animal. So patient zero dies, depending on the type of disease, but usually patient zero dies. And then what the farmer would have to do, or what the vet has to do, is medicate the entire barn and medicate them for potentially longer, because they've had this disease for longer. But what we do is, because we're there 24/7 and we detect it as soon as, we identify those diseases, and we've proven that we can detect it up to 6 days earlier than a trained human, that gives the farmer the opportunity to save patient zero and medicate a smaller group and medicate a smaller dosage, which not only saves them a lot of money, but also, when you look at the entire kind of domino effect of this in the supply chain, that means the meat that we would get in the end has had potentially a more reduced / more responsible consumption of antibiotics.
Yeah.
So that's what happens now.
Right. So you're basically helping to reduce the number of antibiotics that we as humans consume when we end up consuming pork.
We are trying to reduce the death rate on the farms to begin with. But one of the outcomes that we have seen is yes, that over time it could result in reduction in antibiotic consumption, because you're detecting them earlier and not medicating as much. But that comes to your second question, is why is Virbac interested in it? And so most animal health companies are now being asked, and I'm talking about animal health industry in general, not just Virbac. They're being asked to come up with solutions for disease prevention, and someone like Virbac or their competitors, there's a lot of focus on vaccines because vaccines is the way to prevent, diseases and outbreaks. That paired with this solution gives them a much stronger position in the market because one, they can sell it to other farmers that aren't necessarily kind of buying Virbac products, and this applies to Virbac and our other distributors. And then they get to show over time that, okay, if you use my brand of pharmaceuticals, then your barn performs better, and here's the data to back it up. So it kind of becomes like a good proof point for their own selves also. Then the other thing we figured out, and this is how Virbac helps the industry. In the EU, there's these types of kind of regulations that are, I don't know whether they've landed or they're coming, but I do know that, vets are kind of like being asked to provide proof there was a need to administer antibiotics. So now they have to either do it using lab tests or subjective kind of recommendations. But when you have a tool like this, then they have the data to back it up. And that's why we say it will result in responsible use of antibiotics.
And now you've this partnership with Virbac. You're going to be distributed across different continents. You just said you have a Series A that we're part of, and we're very proud to back you. What's next for you? I mean, you're going to go from pork to, I guess, other animals. Yeah, what's the vision for the next couple of years?
Yeah, so I guess the next couple of years would include, having delivered, the current solution to the market really well. Like I would want to see like a lot of happy farmers and a lot of good stories at the back of this solution, and then see this now being applied. And then so 2 years from today, we would be sitting here and be like, MACSO is now with pork is like everywhere in the world, and we're also kind of like in this one or maybe this other two animals in these other parts of the world. And now we are kind of planning a roadmap for, companion animals or horses. And then, 5 years from now, be like, we're monitoring every animal on the planet.
That's very exciting vision. We found somewhere in our research that you said something on a panel, which I think resonated with a lot of founders that are probably listening to this. I think it's you're a little bit worried. I think you said something like, having a company is like having a child. It's great to have it, but sometimes you just want to give it back. Just kind of to wrap up the conversation and going a little bit into what it's like to be an entrepreneur at this stage where we were just chatting earlier, you're traveling the globe, you have all these big partnerships, you're really pushing the boundaries. What's the kind of personal journey of being a founder at this stage?
Yeah, that sounds like something I would say. Disclaimer, I do not have a child, so I do not know what it's like, but I've seen people with children and I kind of like feel like that's what it's like.
It is, for sure.
Yeah, so the personal journey, it's been extremely challenging, but also extremely rewarding. If I were to put that in one sentence, I would say becoming a founder was a great trust building exercise with myself. And because you always hear these things like trust your gut feel and trust yourself and do this and do that, or, you're in a leadership position and it's a very lonely place. And these are just like words and phrases that you hear until you're in that situation, you're actually experiencing it. And it has, for me personally, been a very interesting kind of growth journey. The scenarios where I've had to force myself to separate personal stuff that's going on, whether it was like loss of a loved one, whether it's like what's going on back home, and not let that interfere with work. Like, especially like you would hear something like that in the morning and then you have an investor call that you have to sound so excited about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Or like having to regulate your my thoughts and emotions when you're going through these extreme highs and extreme lows of the company. And then, one day during one day, I might wake up feeling that I can change the world, then go back to why do I even exist, to now I really got this, to then, questioning my life choices. So there's a lot of these ups and downs that I've personally experienced. I don't know if every founder experiences that. I live this with a passion. Like it's an obsession for me at this point. I don't think it's love anymore. So yeah, I guess kind of like regulating and balancing act has been like the biggest challenge, but also that trust building exercise of, learning to trust myself to make certain difficult decisions and situations. And then if it works, amazing. And if it doesn't work, just be okay with that. Just know that at that given point in time, I made the best decision with the data that I had.
Yeah. I really like that framing of learning to trust yourself. That's really great. I mean, I think what you realize as you go through the journey is that like there's nothing really that it all seems like a lot of these things seem very big, very difficult, but like you sort of like, it's like, how do you eat an elephant? Like one bite at a time, right? It's like one of those things. Once you've gone through enough of those big decisions, big things, you realize you can do it. It's just a matter of time and grit. You sort of build confidence. I think, yeah, it's a big part of it. So I love that framing.
Yeah, and I think one thing that really helped me, and I'll put this out there for any founder that's listening, or anyone that's listening that could find this helpful. My coping mechanism is always storytelling. I love telling stories, right? And when I'm going through the highs and when I'm going through the lows, I always tell myself that without this, the story won't be good. No one will want to watch a movie that has not down. No one will want to watch a movie that things didn't go wrong from every single direction and that everybody panicked and that everything was about to, and that's kind of like my mental kind of coping mechanism when I'm going through those phases. I'm like, part of the story.
I love
part
that.
of the story.
I love that. What's the story that you tell yourself?
What's the story that I tell myself about the company?
Yeah. And about yourself. Yeah.
About myself, the story changes on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, based on my mood. But part of the story of the company that I'm very proud of, and I acknowledge that we're only 5 years in. We have a long way to go. This isn't me sounding proud. This is just me kind of acknowledging what has happened. As I said in one of the other videos, when we were talking about Bridgewest, I was like, the reality is we started the company during COVID, so a global pandemic. And when we had to raise our pre-Series A, we faced a global recession. And then we nearly kind of came to the US in 23, 24, and we faced a major regulatory change, which we had to then pivot the market to different regions. And now that we're taking the company global, there's a major conflict that's like impacting a whole bunch of things. And then I just kind of tell myself that, okay, if you've survived those, unless there's an alien invasion, I don't know.
Well, they might actually ally with you because of the name of the company, right? They might actually come from MACSO.
There you go. Yeah, maybe they are from that MAX 0467-JD. In which case, I'll be winning. But yeah. So I think it's kind of like I keep reminding myself that if I could overcome, if the company and the team could overcome these obstacles, then there isn't. Not that there isn't anything, then it kind of gives me more confidence and kind of like just looking at in the future and what's coming. Or I remind myself of the survival skills every time I'm going through a very, very rough patch. But yeah, at some point, I kind of like sometimes envision the movie that's based on, the company.
And so in your mind, how does that movie end? In
my mind, how does that movie end? So there's a way that the movie about MACSO ends, which is the vision that I've had, and I put it on the website. And I don't know whether the movie ends with this or starts with this. Could start with this, but one of those starts that's like the ending. And that is, 100 years from now, which I always say now it's 95. It was 100 when we started. Someone that's like looking up the history of the company and the technology that we created, and they sit and wonder in a positive way what the world would have been like without us. And that kind of like where it either ends or starts. When I think about a movie made about me, it's the technology has kind of gotten like so advanced and it's now everywhere that the movie ends with me being in like a NASA control room and just watching the data coming from like different galaxies. And it was, the technology that that my company created that's out there, that's not giving us all this data. Yeah. So yeah, that's a bit of an ambitious daydreaming that I do.
I mean, there's a version of this movie where I mean, you did your thesis in AI ethics, right? And like you now run an AI company, and I think part of the reason you have processing on edge is not to store data, right, and to sort of privacy first. Maybe a version of this movie is like where you have to like succumb to the pressures that that the commercial side of having a business puts on you, or the investors put on you. That like at some point you'll have to go against your values, right? In creating an AI company and managing a lot of data and privacy and things like that. Have you thought about that? Now, I know it's very abstract, but I think every single AI company now, I think they all had grand visions, right? I mean, OpenAI is called OpenAI because it's supposed to be open source. I think Dario at Anthropic was also, very focused on kind of, yeah, just having an ethical perspective and use of AI and models, and now he's struggling with the Pentagon, and I think there'll be a lot of other struggles and people using their products for use cases they maybe didn't originally intend for. Have you thought about that? And I mean, maybe has that even come up already, where there's commercial pressures on the business that maybe go against your initial vision or how the company should be run?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of pushed back on a couple of defense-related ideas that I personally was against. But again, acknowledging defense is a huge concept. Like civil defense is okay. Back to original point about, some companies being under a lot of pressure about like taking a different route. Could it happen? I would be very naive to say no, we can't. But one thing that I did learn, and I read this book called Tools and Weapons by Brad Smith of Microsoft, and it's a really good book, and I learned a lot of things from it. But one of the things was, when you have the data, then you can be forced to use it a certain way. But the way we are deploying this technology, so firstly, we're focusing on good data more than big data. So the type of data that we are collecting is collected in a controlled environment, very specific, 100% proprietary to MACSO. We will continue to do that. But once the technology is out there, there is no audio data that basically comes back to us that we can use for anything else. So then that puts us in a position of a company that can force us to do whatever, but we're not going to, because we don't have the data to do it. And a lot of those things, when you see companies being forced to do it, is because they have the data. They're just saying, we're not going to use it for this and that. But they have it, which means then the pressure kind of comes back. But when you don't have it from the get-go, and when you've kind of been very intentional about the type of data that you collect and your use cases, then it will be a lot harder to do it. Unless, I don't know about the future, unless like something extraordinary happens, and then, all the investors be like, no, redirect the company to this other thing. Yeah.
And more of like a personal, I guess, question now. Like, you've obviously been very prescient about AI risks, and I've been thinking about this for a while. Well, what is I mean, there's concept of P-doom, right? I'm sure you're familiar with. What's your P-doom value? Like, do you think it's, and even do you think it's even a real thing, right? There's people who think AI is gonna, with a certain very high degree of probability, eventually become AGI and exterminate humanity. There's people who think this is just another technology that we're gonna absorb and become better through as a species. What is your kind of real personal opinion on that?
Do I think we will reach AGI and then after that ASI? Yes. Yeah, I think we will. Mostly because we have a lot of smart people who want to. Do I think LLMs are the only thing that defines AGI? No. Because to me, artificial general intelligence, the definition of that is an AI that can do everything a human can. And humans don't just generate language. They don't just solve mathematical equations. They don't just do certain things. Like, to me, and that's kind of goes back to that previous concept of we don't have a universally agreed upon definition of intelligence, and therefore AGI, and therefore ASI. So that definition of intelligence that I have, and the AGI definition that I have, which is everything a human can do, that is not only covered by these like large language models, and the advancements that are being made in this field, as impressive as they are, But yes, I do think that at some point we will. Will it be good or bad? That really depends on how we go with the governance and putting these like safety guidelines around. And I know there's some work that's being done by governments around the world. There's like policies that are being made about use of AI in autonomous weapon systems. There's you're kind of starting to see certain kind of like terms and conditions coming up. Like I signed up to quote the other day and it said I need to consent that you're over 18. So I can see like these types of things coming up. But again, my fear is that they're slower than the speed of the advancement of AI. So are we doing something? Yes. Are we doing enough? No. I think that's going to be the danger.
I mean, one thing that is like sort of underlying your perspective is that the intelligence that we have is actually like is valuable and it's important, right? And it probably is, right? Because like just by definition of us being human, we believe that. But there are plenty of species like sort of adjacent to humans in the evolutionary timeline that went extinct, right? Like Neanderthals and other sort of like, I don't know, all the different types. Some of them like actually shared some genes and interbred with humans, and we see that through our DNA. Looking back, we can see parts of like Neanderthal DNA and other types of DNA, but a lot of them went extinct. And I'm sure looking back, people try to reconstruct, and they see actually some of these species were healthier, or maybe taller, whatever, had better genes in certain ways. And for whatever reason, kind of humans survived and won out, right? But could it be that, I don't know, to this question of like, what intelligence is important? Like maybe all these other intelligences and I guess, ways that we process information are not that important at the end of the day in a competitive environment. Are you worried about that?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of your question again?
Yeah, like, do you worry that, like, at the end of the day, maybe some aspects of our intelligence is actually not that important for survival and in the competition, competing with either AI directly or people who are like enabled by AI? And I'm thinking like, some kind of merge scenario where like humans merge with intelligence in some way. And like, humanity as we know it maybe goes extinct because it just doesn't compete very well.
Well, that's the reason for my reaction is there's actually a scientist, like I can't remember his name, that he actually says AI is the next evolution of humans, and we shouldn't get in the way of it, and we should actually let it happen.
Right.
Do I see that as a risk of merging AI with artificial intelligence with natural intelligence? I think the biggest risk of that would be, let's say if our minds were all kind of like connected to Microsoft data centers and then someone hacked it. And then someone polluted it with some kind of a virus or decided to. Right now, our intelligence is edge-based. Right? Human intelligence is edge-based. Like we don't need cloud connectivity for our brain to work unless you kind of like use brainwashing techniques from early childhood. You cannot hack, digitally into someone's brain and overnight like change their thought patterns, right? So I guess we would then open up ourselves to a lot of the vulnerabilities that the machines currently face. So I think that would be a huge risk if we decided to go down that path. As fascinating as that would be, I don't think I would be one that would sign up for my brain being connected to any sort of cloud. Is it necessary at the end of the day for the survival of our species is a different question. Does it mean that people like me who wouldn't want to sign up for that would go extinct, whereas the ones that did it would survive? Yeah. That's an interesting question to ask. I don't want to give a definitive answer. It's not a question I've ever thought about before. It's an interesting one. I'm going to give it some thought.
Great. I want to move us into, I'm sure we could have talked about this for another 3 hours or so, but I want to move us into a quick rapid fire, if you don't mind. So just a few kind of very quick questions and would love a very quick answer, if that's okay. Cool. Mark, do you want to fire with the first one?
The last genuinely good piece of advice someone gave you that you actually used?
Oh, it's the psychology of being put on the spot. The last piece of advice someone gave me that was really good. There were so many. Why am I going blank?
That's all good. We can come back to that one. Let me give you another one. What's the most wrong thing the AI industry currently believes about itself?
That the large language model bubble will never burst.
Cool. Mark?
If Stephen Hawking could see what you've built, what's his response?
It's a good start, but you're a long way away from where I want it to be.
What's the one thing you know now that you would have saved you 6 months of pain in the beginning of MACSO that you could do differently?
Being more realistic about my commercialization pathway.
Your motto
Fine.
is I'll find a way or make one. Give me an example of a moment where you genuinely did not exist and you had to make one.
It was and this is one of the examples, the regulatory change that hit us in the US when we were about to get our first order by a farm, and it got canceled, and we had the option to give up, but I said no, and I went to Europe and China, and then, received closed Europe.
Cool. Well,
All right.
yeah, Saba, thank you so much for joining us. One final sort of maybe question to leave it off. There's there's probably a 22-year-old who just arrived in Auckland earlier this week. And what do you think, what would your advice be to her? Somebody who is just like you, who has the same passion, who has the same, lack of tolerance for injustice and wants to make a dent in the world. What kind of advice would you give her? I
would tell her, no matter what, believe in yourself, because if you don't, no one else will.
Great.
That cliche.
Yeah, no, that I think your story kind of speaks to it. So this is really great. And I think the other thing I really take away from this, which I think is great advice for all New Zealand founders, is that the Earth and the globe and other continents is just a very tiny place in the universe. You should definitely think big and think global. So thank you so much, Saba. We're super excited to join you on this journey. And yeah, we look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to TechMates. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with friends. We'll be back soon with more stories of Kiwi and Aussie founders reshaping the future and disrupting down under. Until next time, keep dreaming big and daring to disrupt.